So I want to thank everyone for coming. My name is Mary Scott Russell, and as many of you heard already, I work here at Eastridge in Cutler Bay. It's a 76-acre, beautiful senior living community that's the home to 42 veterans. We've been working to engage our residents during this time of COVID, and Richard's been so incredibly helpful, from a virtual veterans conversation that keeps everyone safe but connected, to virtual Zoominars to help teach seniors. We taught for a year how to use this technology to stay in touch with their families and friends, churches and temples, activities groups. And it's really been a wonderful, wonderful tool for us. So Richard and I met, as I mentioned earlier, at Ocean Reef. He's a member of Toastmasters and actually was the International Club President and Hall of Fame Speaker Award winner. He's delivered seminars and workshops across the country and the world, as far as Belgium, India, and South Africa, on trade show hosting and how to exhibit during trade shows, and was listed in the Trade Show Executive magazine as a who's who in the trade industry. More than 350 of these workshops around the world. But his personal history, he's U.S. Army NCO, Vietnam War veteran, a nuclear weapons specialist. He's the author of this book that I love. It's called My Time in the Army, and it's available on Amazon. And it's important to note, I'm not pitching the book because it benefits Richard. He donates all of the proceeds to World War II, Korean, and Vietnam War veterans. His passion and dedication runs deeper than that. He founded the Veteran Visitor Organization. So it's veteranvisitor.com. And for my resident veterans, dropped off 5 beautiful handmade blankets, medals, and information for them to use as a prize for one of their luncheons. Hi, welcome. So with that, that's a little bit about me and Eastridge, my friend and colleague, Richard Erschik. And Richard, I'll hand it over to you and you can manage the mute button from here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mary Scott. I don't know when I had time to do all of that, but it's a nice reminder. I might point out that the name of the book is actually My Time Served in the United States Army. And one lucky attendee today is going to get a copy of this. We're going to ask Mary Scott to pick a name from those that are here today, and I'll make sure I send you a copy of this thing. It's pretty interesting. I'm sure everybody in this meeting today has a book in them too. And when you read this one, I think it'll encourage you to write your own, because the memories, when you start thinking about them, they just come flowing back. From the standpoint of technology, if you don't mind, and this is going to be a very informal presentation, I'm going to turn off everybody's microphone for the first few slides until we can get everybody going and on the same page. And then there'll be a point in time when we're going to open this up to some questions and some comments, because I can't tell you how I appreciate seeing all of these faces on the screen of the people that I've been talking about for the last 7 years as a volunteer at the Nike missile site here in the Florida Everglades. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the microphones, and then I'm going to project a PowerPoint presentation. I want to make sure everybody is comfortable and ready for this, and you can sit back and relax. First of all, let's cut the microphones off. I've just muted everybody. And then I'm going to share my screen, which is going to be a PowerPoint presentation. And it has some statistics and information in it that I think you'll find interesting. I, first of all, want to thank Mary Scott and Eastridge for hosting this presentation again today. And I want to personally thank the Nike crewmen around the world, many of whom are in this room today. I hope I can provide some interesting information for attendees and bring back some memories for you people that actually served at this site. For those people that are local here, you know, I keep using the word Nike, and one of the questions we get asked at the site is, does it have anything to do with the shoes? And I have to spend time explaining the difference between the Nike missile and the Nike shoes. And although I'm from Chicago, and I lived through all of Michael Jordan's successful championships, we're not going to talk about Michael Jordan here, and we're certainly not going to be talking about Nike shoes. This has to do with the Nike missile base. I'm going to make this presentation from 3 of my different vantage points, my personal vantage points. three of my perspectives and three of my own personal experiences. The first of which is when I was a teenager back in 1962, when the Cold War and this Cuban Missile Crisis actually began. I was 17 years old, and I'm sure there's people in this room that wish they had that car that I'm leaning up against. I wish I still had it too. For those of you that know me and see me on screen right now, there's a difference between today and yesterday. I, in fact, at one time in my life did have hair. I could probably spend 20 minutes telling you why I don't any longer, but I won't bore you. The second vantage point and perspective and experiences that I'm going to deliver this presentation from are from my time in the Army. I was drafted in 1965 and I served until 1967. I was called in during President Johnson's 240,000 troop call when the Vietnam War heated up. I was 20 years old at that time. If you look at the dates, that's 3 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then lastly, I'd like to make this presentation from the vantage point and my experience and perspective of having been a tour guide at the Nike Missile Base, HM-69, A Battery, 2nd Battalion, 52nd Air Defense Artillery Unit that was stationed in Everglades National Park, the site that's so near and dear to the people that are in this meeting today. I worked there for 7 years. I've talked to, I want to say, thousands of people, and I've tried to relive and tell the story that all of you actually personally lived. And I just, again, I'm so appreciative and thankful that you're in this room and you accepted our invitation to be here with us today. By a show of hands, because there are some local people in here today in this meeting, who knows that there's a Nike missile site in the Florida Everglades? Who even knows that? I'm surprised that there are so many people here in Homestead that don't know that. They don't know this site exists. So for those of you that have your hands up and you knew it was there, how many of you have been there? How many of you have taken the drive through Everglades National Park out to where this Nike missile base is actually located? There are so many people who haven't, and I can't wait to make this same presentation to groups of people who are just going to be general casual visitors to let them know that this site exists. Now, it was called HM-69. It was named HM-69 by the military. Its formal name was A Battery, the 2nd Battalion of the 52nd Air Defense Artillery. It's located in the Florida Everglades. It was commissioned in 1962, and it was decommissioned in 1979. There's an open house at the site that the Everglades National Park puts together every year. It's open from 10 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. And there's a ranger-led tour at that site that starts at 2 o'clock every day. The difference is the open house is basically staffed by volunteers like myself who did not serve there, but many of us are volunteers and veterans who did serve in the military. The ranger-led tour is conducted by an Everglades National Park ranger and generally takes about an hour's time. The open house, I basically tell people, is the Cliff Notes version of the ranger-led tour. And we try to share a lot of information during that ranger-led tour and open house. Let me give those in the room who've never been there some directions. And I'm sure when the veterans from the site that are in this meeting today see these directions, it's going to bring back memories in themselves. But let me show you how to get to the base if you've never been there. If you're coming anywhere from the northern United States, you're going to end up coming down onto the Florida Turnpike. And from the north, you're going to be heading south, and you can take that turnpike all the way to the end. Get off at the last exit, and the first stoplight you come to is Palm Drive. Conversely, if you're coming from the south, up from Key West or any of the Keys, you'll be taking Overseas Highway or Card Sound Road. You'll be taking that north to the first stoplight you come to, which is also Palm Drive. Now, at Palm Drive, you'll go west until you come up to the iconic fruit and vegetable stand named Robert is here. That may or may not have been there back when many of you were stationed here, but it's there now and everybody in Homestead knows it. So to get everybody's bearings, go to Robert is here and make a left. It's that simple. After you make that left turn, you're going to drive about 4 miles and you're going to come to the first stop sign, which is labeled 9336. And there's an arrow, and that west sign is actually just in front of the stop sign. The adjacent corner is the correction center or the prison that everybody in Homestead knows about. Well, at that intersection, that stop sign, you'll make a right turn. You'll follow that road for another 5 miles or so, and you'll enter into Everglades National Park. You'll go past the entrance to the park, and you'll continue past the Co-Visitors Center, where everybody stops to get information on the park, and this is where they're told about the Nike Missile Base. You'll go past the Co-Visitors Center to the registration gate where visitors pay a fee, and I should point out here to locals, if you're a veteran, you get in free if you can show them some proof of your service. A copy of your DD-214 or a Veterans Administration card will suffice, but veterans get in free. So, okay, you're traveling now into the park. After you go past this registration gate, you're going to come to a sign, and it's about 5 miles. The first place you can take a left, it's well marked as Royal Palm Drive and Hinga Trail or Gumbo Limbo Trail. You'll make a left turn at that intersection. Again, you can't miss it. After you make that left turn, you're going to travel about a mile and you're going to see 2 signs on the right-hand side of the road. The second sign is the one of most interest because it says Nike Missile Site. You're going to make a right at that sign and you're going to follow that road about a half a mile, and you're going to come to another stop sign, which will be the first stop sign you come to. Again, there is a Nike Missile Site sandwich board at that intersection, and you're going to make a right turn. After you make that right turn, you're going to enter a 4-mile stretch of road that is dead straight. Now, we're going to talk about this road a little later in the presentation. And from those of you who served here, I'm sure you remember this road. It probably wasn't 2-lane blacktopped and marked. It was probably dirt and gravel. But you're going to travel exactly 4 miles down that road. And if you're getting confused or this is too much information regarding these instructions and directions, remember, you weren't supposed to know where this was. This was hidden. This was top secret. The military didn't want you back here. There were no directions like this back in the day. So let's get you back on this 4-mile drive. You're going to spend 4 miles driving down this dead straight road until you come to a visible pink building on the left-hand side of the road. And I'm sure the veterans in the room who served here remember that building. Today, it's the Daniel Beard Research Center. Back in the day, it was part of the administration, it was barracks, the radar stations were up there, and it was all affiliated with HM-69. When you see that pink building, if you look off to the left, about a mile downrange, you can now see the bunkers or the tops of the bunkers for the 3 launch sites at the Nike Missile Site. But you'll continue on this road all the way to its end, and at the end today, you'll see another Nike Missile Site sign. You make a left at that intersection, and you'll follow that road another mile to its end, and to the point where you can make a left turn. And now, finally, you are at the entrance to HM-69, the Nike Missile Site located inside of Everglades National Park in the Florida Everglades. Now, again, I can tell you personally, my palms are sweating. I can imagine how the people that served here feel seeing what you're going to see in the next few minutes. Because today, when you drive up to this gate, you see 2 signs. The sign on the left gate gives you the hours that the open house is open. The sign on the right gate says, "Welcome visitors." This is kind of comical, but it's not. When you drive 20 feet past those two signs, there's another sign that said, if you enter, we're going to kill you. So that kind of gets everybody's attention when they come back and visit the site. Some people say, am I supposed to be here? Is it okay that I'm here? Because that sign was pretty threatening. Well, I'm sure you guys and gals that served here remember that sign. All right, you'll pass that sign, and off in the distance, you're going to see two buildings. Now, remember, you're still driving in your car. You're going to see two buildings off in the distance. Those two buildings, when you get closer to them, look like this. They're very strategic and specific in their function. I'll tell you what they are in just a minute. But one of the buildings actually has a picture or a sign painted by hand of the Nike missile, painted on the side of this building. That missile painting is still there today. You'll make a left turn at that building, and when you come around the bunker, this is what you're going to see. And I'm sure this picture brings back a lot of memories to a lot of people in this meeting today. That's one of three of the Nike barns where the Nike missile weapon was stored, and all of the activity took place in and around that barn. This is the launch area for the site. Now let's talk for just a minute about the who, what, when, where, and why of this Nike missile site. And again, at the end of this presentation today, we're going to have plenty of time for questions and answers, and I would love to hear comments from the people in this room about the things they remember from their time served back here. But I think everybody in the country remembers that it was a Tuesday, October 15th in 1962, when President Kennedy was advised that Russia was building nuclear weapons in Cuba. Now remember, I've already told you at the time I was 17 years old, and I remember this like it was yesterday. And it was that time, because Cuba was only about 100 miles away from Florida, it was at that time that the Cuban Missile Crisis began, and President Kennedy assembled his ExComm, or a committee of executives, and for the next 13 days, the world waited on the brink of nuclear war. Now, most people in this room remember this as vividly as I do. And speaking of 13 days, if you have not heard of it or seen it, there is a movie starring Kevin Costner called 13 Days. You have to rent and see that movie if you haven't seen it. If you take any interest in this presentation and any interest in the subject of the Cuban Missile Crisis, rent this movie. Because 5 minutes into this movie, when they mention Homestead, they're talking about the Homestead Nike missile base that we're talking about here today. This is an incredible movie, and I'd be lying if I said I haven't seen this thing at least 20 times. I have the lines memorized. It's an incredible movie. I'm sure everybody remembers the speech that President Kennedy gave live on TV. It was in Times Square in New York. It was flashing on all the billboards when he used words like unmistakable evidence that there's nuclear weapons there. The evidence established the fact that offensive missile sites were being constructed on the imprisoned island of Cuba. Remember those words? You can actually read that speech. It's online. It's hair-raising. But I remember this like it was yesterday. And I think everybody in the room remembers duck and cover. You remember hiding under your desks because nobody knew what was going to happen. Everybody was scared to death. Companies and families were building fallout, air raid shelters and bomb shelters underground to get away from the potential of nuclear war. I mean, do you remember all of this? I remember it like it was yesterday, and I tell this story hundreds of times at the Nike missile base. It's incredible to deliver this message to people who've never heard it. Now, I mentioned I was 17 years old back then. I was living in Chicago. In fact, I was born and raised in Chicago. And we used to drive down Lakeshore Drive, LSD, along the Lake Michigan lakefront. And on Tuesday mornings at 10:30 in the morning, the entire city was alerted with air raid sirens. And the Nike missiles, not Hercules missiles, but Nike missiles came up out of the ground, out of their silos, and they were pointed up in the air and exercised every Tuesday morning. And then they went back into their silos. Now, I saw that more days than I can even remember, but I do remember it like it was yesterday. It was a serious defense against the potential during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, HM-69 was commissioned in 1962, but construction on the site wasn't completed until 1965. And I think there are some people in the room today who are going to remember some of the next couple of slides, because for more than 2 years, the 160 soldiers that were at this site, they lived in tents. They lived with the humidity, with the heat of South Florida, with the alligators and the mosquitoes. In fact, this is an actual picture of how some of these soldiers served at this Nike missile site. Can you just imagine this duty? I served in the Army, but I didn't serve in anything like this. And there may be people in this room who are in this picture, for all I know. But again, I just can't thank you enough for your service. And I hope you appreciate some of these memories, because back in the 1960s, we were just kids. We were just kids off the block, on the block, converted to soldiers. We were drafted. We didn't know what the hell was coming. We went from being teenagers to soldiers overnight. It was scary times. Back then, you remember, guys and gals, what did we have? What were we doing on the block? And what were we doing when we got drafted? We were drinking beer. Remember the beers back then? Remember Old Style? That was a Chicago beer. Pabst Blue Ribbon and Hams. Remember that? That's what we were doing. We were drinking beer. We all had girlfriends. I could probably spend 2 hours talking about this slide, but I won't. You remember what it was like. We had our music back then. That's all we had. Beer, girls, music. Remember that? That's what these guys had when they were serving back there. That was their only escape. Oh, wait, there was one other escape. You remember that 4-mile stretch of road that you took to get back here? Well, back in the 60s, we had our cars. Remember the muscle cars? Guys, you remember it was in 1962 when Chevrolet introduced the 409 motor? Remember the Chevy 409? Didn't we all wish we had one? Remember the GTOs and the Corvettes? And when Dodge introduced the Hemi? And I don't think I learned what Hemi was until I was in my 40s. But Hemi was that hemispherical combustion engine. Remember that thing? Everybody wanted one. Remember what 4-speeds was? Who remembers what dual quads were? Anybody remember what those were? 2 4-barrel carburetors. Remember 3 deuces? What did that mean? How about 411 rear ends and blue dots? This is all we had to distract us from the Army and the military and the war back then. And you guys that served at this base back in that hellhole with the mosquitoes, the heat, the alligators, it's just amazing to think back that this was our lives. Let's go back to this site for just a minute. Let's go back to this location. Imagine, everybody in this meeting today, imagine you're standing on that X right now. See where that red X is on the screen? Imagine standing there. Well, from a couple of 100 feet up, if you were standing on that X, this is where you would be. Let me go back to this. If you're standing on that X, this is where you were standing. That X in front of the barn is that X in front of the barn. This is what the base looked like from an aerial view. There was a lot going on this base, a lot more than just the launching area. There were 3 specific areas connected to this base. Remember the 2 buildings that you went past when I pointed them out with the missile drawn or painted on the outside of the building? That was the Missile Warhead and Assembly building. There was also a building called the Dog Kennels. Remember, they looked like this. MP dog kennels. Why would there be a dog kennel back here, associated with the Nike missile base. Well, the security of the base was patrolled by German Shepherd dogs. And today, in our audience, we have Jack Deuce, who was an actual dog handler back in the day. And I've been emailing and Facebook messaging him all day today, asking him questions about his dog handling experience. And I hope he spends some time with us at the end of this presentation today, telling you what he told me, because I found it incredibly interesting that dogs patrolled this area. The other small building that you drove past is a Nike Warhead and assembly building where the weapons were assembled. And after they were assembled, they were trucked down to the barns and they were stored inside of those barns. Now, I've superimposed a picture on top of a picture here. And although it's not totally accurate as far as location of the weapons, it shows what it would have looked like with 3 of those Nike missiles outside of the barns sitting on their launch pads. There's 3 launch pads at each launch site. There's 3 launch pads at each of the 3 barns in which there are 6 missiles. So this was what it would have looked like back in the day with those missiles out on the launch pads in the launch area. Inside the barn today, from those of you who have not been there are all kinds of artifacts to look at. There's miscellaneous information on this board that's really interesting. And for Jack Deuce, if you look down on the floor, you see, on the board to the right, you see a gentleman kneeling with that German Shepherd dog. I'm going to send you a picture of that person, and perhaps you know who it was. But there is a lot of information about the Nike missile inside that barn. There's the radar guidance system. You can actually look into that thing and see what that looked like. There's a rocket motor cluster that we found somewhere. There's a warhead and motor going into a temperature controlled container. There's the control units, the testing units, and there's all kinds of information in there. It's found to be very interesting by visitors. Again, looking at the overhead of the base, there were 3 barns, and inside of each of the barns, there were 6 missiles. Now, this was a nuclear capable missile, and we'll talk about that in just a second, but inside the barn were high explosive and nuclear weapons. The other 2 barns today look like this. For those of you that are curious, there is only one barn that's open to the public, and that's the one that has the missile on display. The other 2 look like this. The doors are closed, but the exterior of the buildings have been preserved. It all still looks the same. The bunkers are still there. It's basically the same as it looked back in the day. You can actually drive back here for locals today. The same gate that you enter is the gate that you exit after you drive around the base. So you can drive past all of this today and take a look at the 3 barns, and then on your way out, you just make a right turn and go out the same gate that you came in. Inside the berms, on each side of the berm, there's what's called a ready room or a fire control station. There might be somebody in the audience today that can shed some light on exactly what went on in that ready room when this presentation is over. I would love to hear some of it myself. As far as the missile itself, if you look at the picture on the left, this was the Nike Hercules missile, not the Hawk, not the Ajax, but the Hercules. It basically consisted of 4 components: the radar guidance system on the front. Immediately behind it was the warhead. Behind that was what I call the 2-target motor. There's an actual solid fuel motor behind the word U.S. Army. And then the 4 solid fuel motors that actually boosted off the launch pad, or the booster motors. On the right side of the screen, you'll note that this is an anti-aircraft weapon. It's designed for airplanes specifically. It flies at over 3 times the speed of sound. It flies up to 150,000 feet and an approximate range of about a mile. It is similar to the space shuttle in that seconds after it leaves the launch pad and the booster motors serve their purpose, they drop away and fall back to Earth. And it's the white section on the top of the missile, pictured on the right-hand side of the screen, that go into the target. So it's basically a two-stage weapon. Now, this is a statistic that I share with visitors out here that makes their mouth drop open, and it is pretty hard to believe because the bomb we dropped over Hiroshima in World War II was a 13 kiloton nuclear weapon. The Nike missile is a 40 kiloton nuclear weapon, which puts firepower in total perspective. And trust me, and I say this with a little bit of a grin when I'm telling it to visitors at the base, if I had known this Nike missile was standing in this Everglades in 1962 when I was hiding under my desk in school, I would have felt a hell of a lot better. But we had this defense system all over the world or all over the United States to protect us against any harm that could be coming from Cuba. And I feel a lot better about the situation today than I did back then. Pictorially, this describes the process as best as I've ever seen it presented. So graphically, if you look at the arrows, DOF is direction of flight. If you start with the right-hand side of the screen, when airplane motion was detected, our radar detected the movement. As the airplanes would get closer, we would acquire them as a target. And as the airplanes flew farther, we would get them into our intercept point and launch the weapon to destroy them. So this is basically the best graphic I've ever seen of the whole process of the Nike missile. And for those of you that don't know this, YouTube has a lot of information relative to the Nike Hercules missile still today. I have combed YouTube, I think, endlessly, getting all the information I could. I'm told and verified that there were 265 Nike missile sites across the United States, but here in South Florida, there were only 4 Nike Hercules missile sites. There were Battery A, which we've been talking about here in the Everglades. There's Battery B in Key Largo. There is Battery D and Battery C farther north up in South Florida. I'm going to leave this slide on the screen for just a minute until you can get your bearings. It's a little confusing, and I'd like to explain it to you if I can. Homestead in this aerial view is off to the far left, the town of Homestead. But there's a road that I think everybody in this room knows about. It's called Card Sound Road. And if you took Card Sound Road all the way to its end, where you see the intersection depicted as a white dot, if you made a left turn at that intersection, you would go into Ocean Reef today, which is a very exclusive residence. If you made a right turn at that intersection of Card Sound Road, just past Crocodile Lake, you can still, a little ways down the road on the left-hand side of the road, if you can see my mouse on the screen circling this arrow, you can still see the tips of 3 radar towers at Battery B. And this is where Rick wants to visit when he comes down here in April. If you continue to follow that road to the launch area downrange, you can see some of the material still standing. But as I read, the park district is letting nature consume this site. It's not going to be destroyed. They're allowing nature to basically take it away. But you can see here are the borrow pits where they got all of the dirt or the fill to build up the bases. Here's the borrow pit for the launch area. And again, this is Battery B located in Key Largo. There are still some remnants, and I'm excited that Rick is going to be able to visit that with his wife in April. All right, why do I know so much about this? Well, I think I mentioned at the beginning of this, I am a veteran, Army veteran. I was drafted in 1965. I served until 1967, but I served on the Honest John rocket, which is a very similar weapon system with not as much power, if you will. And as I described the difference between a rocket and a missile, when we pushed the button on the Honest John rocket, we had no idea where it was going. We just hoped it went in the direction we pointed it. It wasn't guided in any way. In fact, the Honest John rocket was superseded by or replaced by the Nike Hercules missile eventually. But I was a senior assembly and nuclear warhead specialist. I was the guy who armed the nuclear warhead on this Honest John rocket. And what at the time was absolutely 100% top secret, when I jumped up on the launcher to arm that warhead, there couldn't be anybody within 50 yards of me. Nobody could see what I was doing. It was top secret. Well, today you can see it on YouTube. So times have changed. I was 20 years old at the time. I should mention that.
Hey, hon.
I should also re-mention that this is all the reason for the book I wrote, My Time Served in the United States Army.
I got the presentation on from the
excuse me, I'm going to go back and see if I can mute everybody again. Okay, back to that book. Listen, I just want to tell you this with a little bit of humor. If I can write a book, anybody can write a book. And as I describe in the introduction in this book, I started writing down on a yellow pad things that I remembered about my military service. And when I started writing them down, they started flowing back to me, and I couldn't write fast enough. And after about 3 or 4 days, I just turned my notes into sentences, and my sentences into paragraphs, my paragraphs into chapters, and I ended up with a book. And I'm sure the people in this room could do the same thing. As Mary Scott mentioned, this book is available on Amazon, either by title or by my name, and all the proceeds go to veterans. There is another book that I should mention, written by a gentleman who served at this Nike missile site as well. It's called Nuclear Birds in the Everglades. It's also available on Amazon. This book is much thicker than my book, and it's a total remembrance of the Cuban Missile Crisis and how HM-69 played an integral part in that Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, the open house, as I mentioned, is visited by thousands of people. It's open from November to April every year, from 10 o'clock in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. I had the pleasure of working there for 7 years and talking to thousands of people. If there is anybody in the audience today who is local, we'd love to have you come out and visit this site, because we are looking for volunteers like myself that would work 1 day a week, 4 hours, to do what I just did in this last hour. Basically, just tell the story of how HM-69 served its cause during the Cuban Missile Crisis of the Cold War. And with that, I'm going to say thanks for your time. The formal part of this presentation is over. I'm going to open up everybody's microphone, and I'd be happy to take questions or start any type of conversation we can have relative to what I just talked about here for the last 45 minutes or so. I can't again tell you how excited I am that people who actually served at this base are here in this meeting today. Before we get into the Q&A, I'd like to ask, if I could, that everybody turn your cameras on. It might take a minute. Turn your cameras on. If you don't know how to do that, lower right-hand corner of your screen. Mr. Thomas, I love your background. The lower right-hand corner of your screen, there is an icon that looks like a little video. If you'll click on that video, I want to take a picture of this screen with everybody on it, and I'm going to send it to everybody that's in this meeting today. Robert, Paul, you know how to turn your video on? How you doing, Paul? Good to see you, buddy. Unmute yourself, too. Paul, if you don't know how to unmute yourself, in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, there's also a little microphone icon. If you click on that icon, we'll be able to hear you. I know this is a technology challenge here today. Can everybody still hear me? You can turn your microphones on if you like. Go ahead. I'm going to ask everybody on the count of 3 to kind of lean forward and give me your best face or your best smile. And I'm going to take a picture of everybody. And as I mentioned, I'll send this picture to everybody that's in the meeting. 1, 2, 3. Thank you, everybody. All right. Who has a comment? Who wants to say anything?
Uh, Sorry, I'm a little bit late. My computer crashed. Microsoft was wanting to upgrade. It took me 40 minutes to resolve the problem. So I'm in here at the end. I was a Nike vet in Alaska with the 1st Battalion, 43rd Air Defense Artillery.
Cool. Your first name is Sean, right?
Negative. It's actually S, 19th letter of the alphabet. What happened was, that's my pen name. I write Alaska State Trooper mystery novels under Sean. And when I was working as a civilian for the military, and when that happens, you have to have everything approved by the military. And I had a couple bad generals in one of my books. And so it would never have been approved. So I went and Sean, and then I didn't have to change my signature that much. So
That's a great story.
If you write under a pseudonym, what happens, it used to be, it was your lifetime plus 100 years that you had copyright. Now it's your lifetime plus 75 years, which doesn't make that much difference.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense either, but, well, thanks for being here anyway. Anybody else have any comments about what I just presented or their experiences you want to share?
Well, I got a question, if you don't mind, Richard.
Yeah.
I was talking to some friends that served there. None of us remember it being called HM-69. Was it always called that?
It's referred to as HM-69 in all of the documentation, and I wish Paul Kluko could get his microphone working here, because he's, I think, the most knowledgeable person I've met relative to the nomenclature of these bases. So yes, I know somebody also corrected me. I don't know if they're in the meeting today, but they mentioned that in 1962. Was that you, Michael?
I think so.
Well, thank you. You pointed out that it was called HM-65 until 1965, when it was changed to HM-69. Is that correct?
Well, at the start of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the Nike units moved from Fort Bliss, they occupied temporary sites. From a picture that I've seen, it looks like mainly where they went was farmland. And the A battery was at a site called HM-65, which I think was a little bit west of Florida City. And they were there for about 3 years until 69 was built and completed.
You're exactly right. And it was called Hole in the Donut, and it was called Tent City as well. And the soldiers lived in tents. And you're right, it was just adjacent to Florida City, outside of the park. It wasn't in Everglades National Park. Thanks for that, Michael. Where did you serve?
I have no time in the military, but I'm an employee of the Department of the Air Force right now.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Anybody else? Any more comments?
Richard, I'd like to ask a question. If anyone that served at B Battery, I know that there's not hardly any pictures of a launch area at all, like maybe some of the other sites. If they do have them, is there any way they could share them?
Cool. Pictures of B Battery. I think most of you have seen some of my posting on Facebook, but there's about 5 dedicated Facebook pages to the Nike Hercules missile and the various sites around the world.
Right.
There's one I started for HM-69, and there's some for the other sites. If you don't know how to get on those Facebook pages, ask somebody to help you, because there's a lot of information there.
Or .net, okay.
Okay, anybody else? This is amazing to me.
Hey, Richard.
Yes.
We're in Beverly, Massachusetts, and our location is over the top of B-15, which is the Beverly site. I'll hold a photo up closer to the camera. In the foreground, I know there's a little, I don't know if you're going to get it. In the foreground is the missiles set up, and there's an airport in the back, a small municipal airport. But we still have 2 bunkers open. These were underground sites, of course. We have 2 bunkers open that we use for training here. And the third one keeps filling full of water. We couldn't stay ahead of it. But we have quite a history here as well.
Thank you for that, Mr. Foster. I might point out that, and I think everybody in this room noticed, that today in 2021, he still has a picture of that site, and it's part of his personal belongings, and I'm sure you treasure that photograph. I went back and found all of my pictures that I treasured, and I made sure that I made them an integral part of this book. But it's amazing how we keep all of these things to ourselves. I still wear my 2nd Armored Division patch. I still wear, in fact, Paul is in the audience. I wish he could get his microphone working. His group makes face masks with the 2nd Armored. I mean, it's endless how this stuff stays with you and how veterans retain all of this, the smallest details of, I don't remember what I had for dinner Tuesday, but I remember that Fred threw his footlocker out the window. Now, I mean, we just carry this stuff through our lives with us.
I'm Jim Hill, by the way. I'm using Mr. Foster's computer right now. That's why
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry to, well, welcome, Jim. Thank you. Thank
no
you.
problem. And I was talking to someone earlier. My son lives in Homestead, and I've been down there a few times, but the site in the Everglades has not been open because I've been there after April. And I did walk in one very humid day, and could see the buildings in the distance, but it was just too hot to be walking that distance.
Yeah, that's really why it's closed in the hot months, because there's no washrooms back there and there's no running water. I mean, it's pretty well preserved for anybody who actually served there. If you went back there, it looks pretty much like you left.
Thank you.
Got a question.
Yes, Michael.
Does the Park Service have any interest, any intent to install the launch rails and launchers at HM-69?
Boy, that comment is so near and dear to my heart, because that was the last part of my conversation with a ranger when I last served there, which was last week. The conversation has come up, but I don't know if they have an interest. They may have, but I wouldn't know personally where to even find them or to reconstruct them. I don't even know how we would do that. But it would be such an integral part of that site to roll that missile out on that rail.
It's my understanding that at Pueblo Army Depot in Colorado, they had quite a stockpile of launchers and maybe also the rails. And that would be a place to go.
Well,
See if they had stuff to donate.
I can't write fast enough. Pueblo Army Depot.
Pueblo, Colorado.
Pueblo, Colorado. Thank you so much. We will be on it, I promise you. Yes, Mr. Trainer.
Oh, it's actually Max, but you know,
Max.
my wife uses this. I like that a lot. I have a question. Can you go through the launch sequence of, say, you got a radar hit from an enemy aircraft? What would be the procedure from there?
I sure wish I could, but I can't. But I would assume there's somebody in this room that could. I know, again, Paul is probably desperately trying to get on here. Paul Kluko. He knows more about this Nike missile system than anybody I've met. Paul, you're still having a problem getting unmuted so we can hear you? Is there anybody else that can answer that question? Can anybody else?
How about me? I was
Okay.
I was attack director at the Army Air Defense Command Post for about a year before I moved on to the advanced course. What happens is you're sitting behind scopes. The battalion commander and the group are way above you. All the S staff. We had a plotting board for manual where the soldiers we learned to plot backwards. And so what we would do is coming into Anchorage were corridors. They were set for course and speed. If you weren't squawking identification, friend or foe, as we said, if it flies, it dies. So what would happen was Madonna was essentially the ADCAP battalion commander. It goes something like this. Battery come to me and say, we've got a track on an aircraft. And I would say, and they weren't sure if it was friend or foe. And I'd say course and speed, which meant it was outside the window and they would say, Roger, Madonna, we have 1 Mike 2230 to intercept. Is that close enough?
Wow. Wow. Did that answer your question, Mac?
That's pretty close. I worked at a BOC, so Battalion Operations Center. So I was right at the radar station where we had live flyovers from MiGs, Russian MiGs coming over. And I got to see the sequence of everything happening, but I wasn't actually at the missile site. We could look down at the missile site and see them pulling the Nikes out and getting ready to raise them. And the actual keys putting in and authentication and all that. So it was kind of exciting for me at that time. I was running communications at that time.
Wow.
Could I push our group? We're friends at Nike Site Summit. We do tours up on the Nike site. We do hikes up to the Nike site. And we're refurbishing the Nike site back to its 70 standards. And you'll find us on Friends of Nike Site Summit.net. We've been doing tours up there for a number of years. Army took out the battery headquarters because they said it was unsafe, which was a lie, but okay. They were limiting area, but what we do is every year we go up there, we clean brush, we refurbish buildings and stuff like that. And so we're trying to get a missile for our site. This was B battery on the top of Mount Gordon Lions. It was one of the few sites where missiles were fired in the early 60s. I know because they fired one and exploded over an unpopulated area, which happened to be Eagle River. Let's see. So anyway, if you get a chance, come to our website.
Can we have that again? What's that website again?
Okay, Friends of Nike Site Summit.net. We couldn't get org. It tells you how we're maintaining. It has pictures of stuff. A battery, which is Kincaid Park now, which is a city owned, still has launch rails and stuff in the underground. And so they still have their launch ramps. And like I said, we're trying to get a missile. We have the money for it. It's just getting the transportation to Alaska. And we're looking to find a free up a missile. And we have the money to pay for the shipping.
If you know how to use the chat function on this Zoom platform, can you put that website in the chat?
Okay. Let's see. It's I have the website's www.nikesitesummit.net. No friends, I'm sorry. My wife pointed it out to me. handed me some paper.
Okay, thank you. Hey, Ricky, Lael, what did you do? You were in the IFC and B battery, weren't you?
Sir, I was a launcher crewman. For the launch sequence, sir, I apologize to everyone. It has been so many years. I just cannot remember the whole launch sequence.
Okay, that's all right.
I can more or less remember the launch sequence.
What, sir?
I was outside of Washington, D.C. And that time frame there, everything ran out of NORAD, and it came to every city was basically the East Coast steel. So one Nike site would get an assignment for a target package. They would obviously lock on with the target tracking radar. You would assign the missile. You worked at 16D. If you were a 16 Bravo, you would be nickname was a pit rat. The launcher control group trailer would assign what missile you would use. Most of them were, the site I worked on, everything was W32, your 20 or 40 megaton warheads. So once the launch order came, which obviously never happened, thankfully, you would assign the missile. The missile would be guided by the missile and target tracking radar. They would work together, and missile would basically take off, reach an altitude of 150,000 feet, then head toward the target. Then about 1/3 of a second prior to intercept, would give the command burst, and that would basically destruct. So they only fly one missile at a time. That's why you have multiple sites around the city.
Okay, thank you for that.
So Richard,
Yes.
yeah, Richard, to take that a little further, so I was downrange in 68 and 69, and you showed the picture of the ready room. That was where the launch crew would evacuate to once the launch sequence was going to happen. So in there, you could control everything. IFC could track the missile, and actually we could fire from there. So at that time, you had to have, and probably still later, you had to have a secret clearance to work around the missiles downrange. And they had what they called a two-man rule. So two people had to be together at all time to access anything downrange. You could not be by yourself. You always had to have a person with you. And you had to have sometimes a secret clearance would take up to 6 months to get that before you could work with the nuclear missiles. Mine took 6 months investigating background. Then finally, they gave me a clearance to work with the nuclear missiles. But that's what the ready room was for, that's where the crew would evacuate to. So out of the 4 bases or the 4 sites, one was always down for maintenance and the other 3 were always could be on ready status at a moment's notice to fire missiles. At that time, SAC was stationed in Homestead, and so the B-52s would fly right over our base there, going to Homestead, fly right over the line of flight there. It was interesting to see those B-52s. That was in 68 and 69 when I was there downrange.
Wow, I can only imagine. Thanks for that, Rodney. Thank you.
Can I ask Rodney a question?
Sure.
Yes.
So, Rodney, what was it like in 69 when the MiG landed at Homestead?
Say that again.
When the Soviet MiG landed at Homestead, what was it like at the battery at that time?
Yeah, we went to hot status at the time. What we called hot status was ready to fire at a moment's notice, and all leaves were canceled. We were on 24 hours and all 48 hours. So if you had plans to go to Miami Beach, your plans were canceled for that particular time. So it was quite interesting.
I mean, so I guess y'all were tracking it and it went below
Yes.
Yes. Radar level, or
Yes. Yeah, it was an interesting time. Of course, in 69, I was 20 years old, and I was thinking more about going to Miami Beach than worrying about a MiG. But I went back in, let's see, for the 2012 for the 50th reunion, and I took my son, and he said, "Dad, do you realize what a responsibility you guys had at a young age?" And, I said, "Son, I never thought about that at that time." But in 2012, when I'm back down there, I think, yeah, what a responsibility we had with nuclear missiles to defend South America, South Florida, rather.
Wow, it's amazing. Makes the hair stand up on my arms. Anybody else? Well, Mary Scott, I don't know. I think we're going to wrap this thing up. Yes, go ahead, Les.
I was just going to say I had a really unique job but I was up north in the New York City Air Defense System, Nike Hercules, in that I was a fire unit integration facilities tech, FOOF, we called it. If anyone knows what that is, raise your hand. It was essentially the connection between the ADCAP, the central command area, and the missile batteries, like the one that we're talking about here. So I not only was stationed from the ADCAP, but I went to all of the missile batteries to help them repair their equipment, and so it was easier maybe for me because I moved around a lot to get a little bit better of the if you will, the flow of command. And it's kind of interesting when you ask that question. When you get to the battery level, especially, you have to ask 2 people that question, because if you were in the command and control vans, the commander's vans, you understood what was going on there. But a mile away was the missiles themselves. And the military has a need to know policy. If you were part of the commander's van's group and the radar, you knew that very well, but you were never allowed around the missiles and vice versa. So to understand both of those, you almost need to ask two different people that same question, because it was only 5 years ago now that I actually stepped on one of the launch sites. It's the first time I'd ever been there, even though this was back in 1969, 1970. I was stationed there. I didn't have a need to know, so I wasn't there. So it was kind of interesting. But the flow obviously was NORAD down to the ADCAP, down to the battery commander, who then was directing the launch area to get the missiles above ground. We actually had an incident in 1970. It's on YouTube now. It's part of the NY-56. They have a wonderful, almost fully restored museum there, except for the radar domes themselves. And one of the docents there gives a really good example of what happened when a Bear bomber penetrated our airspace in the summer of 1970. I'd really urge you to look at it. It's really frightening. We actually got to the point, according to him, where I was actually in the commander's van when this went down, was listening to NORAD when he came in and sat down. But what I didn't know was that they actually had pulled the safety plugs on the missiles and inserted the armed plugs and had them above ground on the launching pads. So we were that close.
Where do we find that lesson on YouTube? What's the title?
I think it's called Jersey Shore. Look up Sandy Hook, NY-56.
Okay.
And the docent there, great guy, Bill Jackson. Turns out when he found out I was standing in the commander's van when this happened, he started pumping me as to what was it like up there. And of course, when he got through, I said, what was it like down there? Because he was about a mile away when this all happened.
Wow, great story. Thank you.
I'd like to, we had a major incident back in 64 with the Good Friday earthquake. I wasn't there, but we met at one of the conferences. One of the gentlemen that had to work on a missile. What happened was, if you look at the newspaper, New York Times, April 4th or 5th from 1964, you will see that one of our missiles dropped off the launch ramp and cracked its warhead. And so the gentleman to this day claims he still has PSD because he had to take the warhead off and carefully dismantle it. So anyway, that's also why we in Alaska can cite that there were nuclear warheads there, because DOD done said it in the newspaper.
Go figure.
So anyway, they were exciting times back then. I was only in the battalion from about 75 through 77, and then went to the advanced course at Fort Bliss. And if you're noticing my picture, that's my Coast Guard auxiliary uniform. I've been in there since 1977, and so that's why the different uniform. We're the civilian component that supports the Coast Guard. So, been doing that in my spare time.
Wow, very interesting. It's good that you're still involved. We had a similar incident with an Honest John rocket where we armed it and got it ready to fire, and we pushed the button and nothing happened. So we have this rocket sitting out on a launcher. You know, when we were kids, we would remember lighting a firecracker and you'd have a dud. The wick would just burn down to the firecracker and you just throw it away. Well, here we have this rocket sitting out on the end of a launcher, and somebody pushed a button, nothing happened. Well, after about a half an hour, guess whose job it was to go out and pull the wires off. That's probably another reason why I don't have any hair. But I can just picture that happening to that one of them falling off of the truck. Anybody else?
Yeah,
Richard, one thing I'd like to share, it's, we were talking about what we would do for our spare time and stuff. Like at the B battery at Key Largo, there was a place, you can see it on the overhead view you showed a while ago of the IFC area. If you sort of go over to the right a little bit, over to the coast, there's a little, looks like a little island like right there. That was the pier that went out into the water, and we'd go out there and, you know, fish, snorkel, stuff like this. But anyway, we were coming to the Card Sound Road one morning, coming to work to turn right to the missile site. It was still dark, and there was a bunch of men come running out of the woods, mangroves, whatever you want to call them, and, you know, car, and, you know, just ask us, what are you doing here? Where are you going? And what it was, they were having a big drug bust at the point that, and these were federal people, and you know, they want to know when they found out that we were military at the missile site, they let us go on. But anyway, what I'm trying to get at, that was one of the days that we actually were locked and loaded with our M16s walking guard duty around that launch area. And, you know, just small stuff like that, you know, I will never forget. You know, like I said, I can't remember a whole lot about the launch sequence, but the area itself and some of the things that we actually did, you know, I can remember it all comes back. You know, when you showed it overhead of the launch area, while it is hardly anything there, it's part of the crocodile sanctuary now. I have gotten permission from the director to go on to the launch area, and it's real. There's nothing left there. They've, you know, crumbled all the launch pads and the launchers into the berms and filled them up, and, you know, nature has taken it back over, but it is, you know, like I said earlier, like you said, it's going to be such an experience to be on that ground that I was on when I was a 17 man, and, you know, serving my country. It's just going to be an experience. I can't wait. And I'm thankful for your time, and, you know, thank you for listening to me. You know, and once again, if anyone does have any pictures or ever comes across any pictures of B Battery's launch area, I would love to have those pictures.
Yeah, yes, Rick.
Yes.
So, Rick, so if you would give me your email address, I have a bunch of photos that I acquired 9 years ago. I will send them to you. Only I got them is in the email. So if you want to give me your email.
Sir.
Or
I'll give you my email address. Now, I might be some of the pictures I have also. There was a gentleman that sent me some pictures, you know, before they tore the barns and all down.
Yeah.
You know, it was still the A barn, you know, it was like he was showing A barn and stuff like that. And it was showing also the missile assembly building was still there. The dog canal kennels were still there. I'm not sure, but I will give you my address, sir. I'll shoot it to you in a message over here on the side. Is that okay?
Yes.
You know, as we get older, as we all get older, the years kind of run together. And you mentioned Card Sound Road, Ricky. When you're coming to Card Sound Road, you made that right turn. I don't know if anybody knows of a place called Alabama Jacks, which is on Card Sound Road. I found out in history that Lee Harvey Oswald actually practiced his training in the field across the road from Alabama Jacks. And in one of the television specials, the documentaries about that, they actually show the FBI agents that were looking for him at the time sitting at the tables at Alabama Jacks. So a lot went on in that area. It's amazing. Okay, anybody else?
It's amazing, Richard. Thank you so much. It's been great. It's funny, I've been in Florida for the past 30 years. I have no clue about those sites, and mostly working in hospice with vets and the Keys, passing through to that road every time, and you don't put attention to anything, you know, until thanks to people like you, you know, with your background and the rest of the people also. Thank you for your service and been great. I mean, that's a great information. And actually, you changed my plan for the weekend. I think I know what I'm going to do on Saturday. So
good. Go out and see that. I said it before, and I say it with a little bit of humor. You weren't supposed to know it was there, but now you are. So come out and take a look at it. It's really interesting.
I was wondering how many servicemen do you think were at these sites altogether?
I was told, and I could be wrong, that there were 160, at A Battery.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken, there was probably around, I would say, anywhere from 140 to 160 at B Battery at any given time.
Okay.
Now, also, one other thing, I'm not sure if anyone has watched any of the videos on YouTube of where people have went into the IFC area at the old B Battery site. As they're going through the hallways, you know, as you go all the way to the very end of the hallway, you can either take a left or right. And both of those were barrack areas. If you take a left and keep going down the hallway to where you're going to the open door like you're going out, on one of the videos, when they get to the very end, the room next to the end room on the left, I mean, it was just like all of a sudden I painted that room, is what I'm trying to get at, and see the paint on the walls of what I painted. Now, see stuff like that, that's the memories that flood back to me. You know, being there with my friends and you know, being a young teenage man and just, you know, enjoying life and serving my country and having a good time.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. There's a lot of history in this screen right now. If you look at the screen of all of these veterans that have served in different aspects of the military, different areas, and all at a time when we were 20 years old and we didn't appreciate what we were doing, but we sure do now. All right, well, I want to thank everybody for being here today. I want to thank you for your service, and I'm going to turn this back over to Mary Scott. I'll get email addresses from everybody, and I'll send you the picture that I took. And again, thank you so much for attending today.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you all for attending, and Richard, thank you. And I put the links to the YouTube video that Les mentioned, and then the link to the Nike Site Summit that Mr. Thomas mentioned as well. So those are in the chat if you haven't had a chance to look, or you want to glance at it or take a snapshot of it so you don't forget to take a look there. Thank you all so much for your time today and for your service and for our education and the stories that you share with us today. It means so much to everybody.
Do you need our address, Mary Scott? Do you need our address?
If you want to share it, that's just fine. Yeah, we'd love to have.
Did Richard mention something about a book? He was going to give us all one?
That's right. Richard, we have to draw from the names.
Yeah, you can do that, Mary Scott. Just pick a lucky name. You got the email list.
Okay, so I will draw a name from the hat. I will have my team. I'll have somebody on my team close their eyes and point to one. So there's no unfair. I don't want to appear biased. Besides, you haven't got enough books, Richard.
I know. I know. Well, it's going to be one, but the rest of you can buy them. Remember, the proceeds go to veterans. I'll get the email address from Mary Scott of the winner, and then I'll contact you for your mailing address, and I'll drop one in the mail for you.
Thanks, Richard. Thank you all so much for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Bye.